thankful for a waving stories. Hold on to the lifetime we won't get back. I know these rivers carry on. People tend to stick to you after time. Places tend to do the same as we do. This river carries on and on.
Hello and welcome to Kankakee Podcast, where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. I'm Jake Lamore, and this is our monthly episode where we team up with the Kankakee County Museum and we present something very fascinating in our county's history. And this one ties in really well with the museum's biggest event of the year. One of the biggest events, I should say. That's not just the one. There are others, like the Gallery of Trees during the Christmas season. But the Rhubarb Festival, which is the 32nd Annual Rhubarb Festival coming up this Sunday, May 22nd. And that features a lot of new things this year on top of the rhubarb that's always there. I know there's the car show, there's kids activities, there's the rhubarb pie eating contest, and we'll get into that some more, I'm sure as well. But I'm pleased to welcome once again Jory Walters and Jack Clacy from the Kankakee County Museum. Welcome to you both. Whoops! Oh, there we go. I was looking for my applause there. But it's always great to have you guys here. Now, there's a new exhibit that people can see starting on the day of the Rhubarb Festival at the Kankakee County Museum, and that's what we're here to talk about.
Yes, we will be presenting The Small Family and every kind of branch of the small family, the good, the bad, everything. And this Dr. A.L. Small is the one who actually grew the rhubarb first. Where the museum is actually standing is where a lot of the rhubarb was grown. And so we decided that he should probably have an exhibit that shows exactly why we have the Rhubarb Festival. But through the ages of this family and how influential they have been through the years in our community.
Yeah, I mean, to Kankakee in general, from the days of being a doctor, growing rhubarb, horticulture, agriculture, eventually starting the newspaper. There's a governor in the family, all these things, and so much more than that. So let's start at the beginning of the Small family. How did they wind up in Kankakee, and when was that?
Dr. Small and his wife came to Kankakee from LaPorte, Indiana, and they first settled in the area near the state park, and then they eventually came to what's now called West Kankakee. They were one of the first to really purchase property in that area. That was 1855. And the other parts of Kankakee had been settled a little bit on the south, on the north, etc., were established for the most part. 1853 is when the city of Kankakee was established, but the west side, it was kind of still no man's land. So they were one of the first to be on the side, and they eventually did purchase a lot of the land and then resold it eventually.
And do you know why the move from LaPorte? Did they know? Did they have relatives out here or anything like that? Or
they settled at Rockville first, I believe, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Rockville area,
which was the old Indian or not reservation, but the Shawanasi Indian camp or Indian village,
yeah.
which by that time was empty, of course, because the Potawatomi had moved west, but there was a little settlement, a Rockville settlement, pretty much about where Rock Creek and on the north bank of the river at that time. And I'm not sure if he was the first doctor there or not. Do you recall, Jerry?
Yeah, was the first, and he serviced them for the outbreak of smallpox. Outbreak among the natives there. So he was there tending to them, and then decided to move to this area.
To West Kankakee. Yeah, and obviously to us, knowing West Kankakee for being heavily populated now, and to think of it back then as nothing.
Nothing, just wild land.
Yeah,
there were very few cabins south and west of the river, were beyond south of where Kankakee later became settled.
So they bought this land, and the house, the whole museum campus was all part of the small family's property.
He built the house. He already had 2 children by then when he came to West Kankakee, and he built the house. Now, what you see there is a big house, but the original was much smaller.
Yeah, I remember you recently walked me through it, which was absolutely amazing. Thank you again for that. Yeah, you were telling, as we were walking through the house, you were describing all of the additions. You're like, and this is another addition and another one.
It grew along with the family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Family grew, the house grew, yeah. So the land that was his is where the museum is, where the trail, all the trees are. Now, the trees were as thick as you can possibly imagine. You couldn't see one tree among them that was so thick.
It was like a forest.
And then where the school is, which did not come to our property till 1976. But the little stone building that's there was part of the original home. And Little Len, governor, had his chicken coop in there. So that was original. The garage, of course, is not. That was added on. There used to be a barn, which is kind of where the flowers are near the entrance of the property. And it was a horseshoe driveway as it is, and the pump is there. But that's where he grew the rhubarb. Now, there was a little bit of land across the street. There was a street, 8th Avenue, but not really. I mean, it's a street, but
and it was dirt, I'm sure. Yeah.
Country road
at that point.
And he was a physician by trade. He loved horticulture, but being a doctor was his main practice. So he practiced an office in his home. But remember, people came from the north side of the city to come and see him. That was quite a distance for people back then on non-existent roads in the worst weather and etc. on the carriage and the horse. And that's one thing I try to stress to the younger people, the transportation.
Yes.
You can't get there in 30 seconds like you can now.
So most of the time, would he make house calls, or would he would make people come to him, or?
Probably
both.
Both, yeah.
I had heard, and maybe you can enlighten on this. I've heard someone told me one time that Dr. Small was obsessed. Obviously, he liked rhubarb. He grew a lot of rhubarb, but did he have a belief that there was something special about rhubarb, that it had healing properties or
medicinal purposes?
It was for medicinal reasons. Did he use it? And
I've heard that too.
Yeah.
Yes. That I would say probably, I think, back then being a physician as well, I would think that he would have looked into that. What do you think? I think so.
Yeah. That's the first I heard of it. Someone mentioned that to me the other day. that it was the reason why he had so much is probably because he used it for his practice, possibly.
Nope, because he did so well at growing it. And he was very successful, and he grew asparagus as well. But he perfected it. He really got good at perfecting the kind that he did, that he really did well in growing and selling. Now, back then, also rhubarb, grew to be the largest exporter in the whole country. So he really got good at growing it and selling it, but there was a big demand for it. So that was a big part of what I think inspired him.
Do you know why there was such a big demand for rhubarb at that time?
I think it was for pies making and for general use. But the thing that really made Dr. Small and his operation successful was he developed a method of forcing rhubarb plants so that the rhubarb would be available in winter months, for example. And he built forcing sheds out west of the house where they just proceeded to whatever process he had, they were able to cause the rhubarb to continuously grow. They could do a continuous crop.
In the winter months.
Oh, yeah.
Did he use was it just sheltering of the plants that he used? I mean, I don't know, was there any trying to get heat involved in that?
I think that was heat was involved. I haven't read much about
sunshine. Sunshine.
That's what blows my mind. There's no sunshine. Obviously, heat lamps don't exist.
Right.
How is...
No, he figured out that if in the indoor rhubarb, if any sunlight hit the plants, they did not form. So it had to be in complete darkness. That he figured out they will grow if no light is hitting them, and he was successful at that too. So all year round, and then it became generational in his family.
Yeah,
down a couple of generations until the market. Demand for it just wasn't there. But also, a lot of people tell me rhubarb grew naturally.
Yes.
In a lot of people's yards, and they, it was very popular to make baked goods with.
Yeah, I heard it just kind of almost would spread very easy too. Like if you grew one plant, it would just kind of
like most perennials, it will spread by stolons or by underground.
Yeah.
Something else that you might find interesting is in his early years, he also had another very successful crop, the Osage Orange. I don't know if you've ever heard of those or not. If you've been to the museum along the north edge of the horseshoe driveway, those trees are actually Osage Orange plants which have gone berserk and growing into tree form.
Yes.
On the prairie in the 1850s, of course, there were relatively few trees. Everything west of Kankakee was pretty much prairie groves, and the only place you'd find trees would be along the streams. So, and this was before barbed wire was invented. So farmers needed some way of fencing off some of their grain crop fields to keep the wandering cattle, which was another major crop, out of the. So the Osage Orange, when it is properly planted, it grows quite fast. If you plant the plants quite close together and prune them, within about a year you have an almost impenetrable hedge.
Yeah, they grow very thick.
And there's remnants of those around Kankakee County, but he sold, Midwest wide. He was one of a number of Osage Orange growers in the Midwest, but was able to be very successful. And it's an interesting sidelight. I don't know how long, probably, I believe that barbed wire pretty much came into availability in the 1860s. So that probably had a really serious effect on the Osage Orange business, because you don't hear much about it after that period. Now,
Dr. Small had two children when they moved here.
His oldest two children, May and Suzanne, were already born. And then the rest of the children came later after they built their home.
And there was 3 more children, right?
4.
4 more children.
Yeah, there was the next in line after that was John, and then little Len, and then Callista, and then Mabel.
Okay. So their family's growing. Obviously, the house is expanding. How does the story continue for the Smalls as the years go by?
They were just a normal family on, kind of not in town, but not in the country. They were just kind of on the edge. They had a little bit more money because remember, he had a nursery business, very successful, sold plants, sold trees, sold rhubarb, was a physician, saw patients. So he was very busy and very successful in every aspect. In fact, we have more stationery from all the businesses, not from just him, but from the family on down, that we could do the entire exhibit just on the stationery alone.
Really? Of all the
Yes.
stationery from all the different small businesses?
Yeah, that morphed off so many pieces. But so he is very, very successful. So they were just a family that did the normal routine of the 1850s growing up. Now, Sister May, she was the eldest, but she passed away when she was young, about 17 years old. And then everyone else grew up and just kind of, they were in the area and then they weren't, and then they came back. And so they all kind of went their separate ways a little bit.
What I want to know with Dr. Small, was he heavily involved in the community? Is that where the Small family starts to get their prominence in the community? Was from him, or was it really more from his children?
From what I gather from reading a lot of material, I think it starts more with Len, because Len was governor, but he did so many different things before he was governor. Started out when he was little and he grew. He was into agriculture. So he was on the agriculture boards. He got the Interstate Fair going, which is predecessor to our current county fair.
Yeah.
He did so many things in the community, political and non-political, that I think really paved the way towards this family. And he had the longest lineage, if you know what I mean. He had the children who did the newspaper, who did WKAN, etc. It was from his lineage.
It was from his side.
Yeah. The acquisition of land. The Small family eventually owned a very, very large amount of land in the West Kankakee area. I think it began probably on a smaller basis with rhubarb fields and so forth under the doctor. But I think when Len became a young man, the pace accelerated of acquiring properties, and virtually all of what we would consider West Kankakee, the area essentially west of 8th Avenue out to farm fields, and from Route 114, I think it goes out toward Herscher, north to above Court Street, at one time or another was owned by the Small family. And a lot of that initially was farmland and were farms. They had traditional grain farming, of course. They also had a large livestock operation. Len was very involved with all phases of the agriculture business and so forth. And you see advertisements in the old newspapers about, livestock sale by Len's small farms and so forth. The rhubarb, I'm not sure where, aside from a large rhubarb operation right at what is now Small Park, I know at one point they had some large planting or large farming area of Rhubarb across from what is now Riverside Hospital on 113 South, because we have photographs of rhubarb harvesting and so forth on that site.
And so even when Dr. Small passed away, Len continued the rhubarb operations on top of his agriculture operations.
And he was very involved and this is by about the 1890s, in the county fair as an agriculturalist. He and a group of other young businessmen in town said that this fair is not doing well. It was having, it was lacking interest and was not attracting people. They sort of revived the whole fair thing. They changed a lot of policies, began bringing in more interesting outside entertainment, for example. And so that led eventually to the Interstate Fair, which in the 1920s and early 30s was the second largest fair in the state of Illinois after the state fair.
So Len was a big part of that, along with other local businessmen. Did before his run as governor, did he serve as an alderman or a mayor or anything like that here locally?
Oh,
He was on the county board, wasn't he?
yeah, he was part of the county board. He was agriculture secretary.
For the
He
state.
did many, like I said, many different things before he was in the top position for the state. There seemed to be like no end to the things that he was associated with, that he was interested in. Great businessman, and then his sons. He and his sons actually did the Daily Republican. Now, back in the day, there are many newspapers circulating in the area. The Daily Republican was one of them. And then it boiled down to they were the last paper. So it was the Daily Journal. Now it's just the Journal.
So that was 1903 when the Daily Republican started. And so did Len start that, or did one of his sons start that in 1903?
No, actually, it was in existence in 1903, and it was a badly failing business. It had been founded by someone else, and First National Bank, which is where Leslie was a cashier or was an officer of First National Bank, and Len was on the board. Yes.
Okay.
The Republicans' credit was very bad, and it was held by the bank. And so Len, who was in his role as a bank director, suggested that Leslie, who was a pretty good businessman, go over temporarily and work at the paper for a while and try to get their finances straightened out and get it functional and profitable again. It was supposed to be a short-term assignment, and it took the rest of Leslie's life. He was the publisher of the Daily Republican, later the Republican News, and eventually the Daily Journal until he died. And I don't remember what year he died.
About 1957, I think.
1957.
And obviously, right, it's still in the Small family today that owns the Daily Journal.
Yeah. Leslie's sons, Burl and Len Howard Small, took over the newspaper operation. Eventually, Burl ran their radio and television or cable TV operations, and Len ran the newspaper until his death when he was killed in an auto accident. And now Len H's sons, Rob and
Tom.
The boys are running the business now and have for years.
So there was two Lens.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, actually, there are even more.
There's more than
Yes.
okay.
Len Howard Small was Leslie's son, grandson of Len.
Okay.
His son, Len Robert, who is Rob Small, is currently the president of the Small newspaper group. And I believe there's another Lennington in the farm somewhere. I think one of Burroughs' sons, if I recall.
Wow.
They interchanged the names so much in that family, especially in Len's line, that it's when we're putting together a family tree.
You have to be very careful,
very
right?
careful. I did actually. I wrote out by hand his lineage on a huge piece of paper, and I keep it in that file. But I had to be very careful. I did it in pencil.
Yeah, because you probably knew you were going to have to erase because you'd be like, oh, wait, that's the wrong Len.
I traced back over it in marker to make it, because you could see it. But
so that can make things very confusing.
Yeah, I had to be very careful to note who was married to who and which date and which year and everything because all the names are so interchanged.
Yes.
One of the interesting features, I think, of the new small exhibit that we're going to be opening on Rhubarb Festival, Jory and Diana Crowley, our curator, have been working very hard on for the last several months. One of the neat features is going to be a large wall. When you walk into the Centennial Room, the wall at the other end, the one big wall, is going to be actually a large family tree, the genealogy of the small family. So all of these complicated relationships will be much more easy to follow.
Right. It'll be easy to follow than listening to them right now. You'll be able to actually walk into the room and see it in front of your face, and you'll understand it probably a lot better. That's
the idea of having everybody in one space, so to speak. And then, because we don't have the Centennial Room does not have a lot of wall space. There's a little bit of space than a door. There's a little bit of space than a door. That kind of thing.
Yes.
So I said there's certain things that I think we really need to make sure that we put in the exhibit. So we need to make room for this. But I said I want to make sure that the family is represented as a whole, and then also talk about individual things of individual people. So I said the idea of the family tree to make sure that everybody can see which Len is which.
Which Len is which ones were involved with the newspaper, and you briefly mentioned earlier all of the different businesses besides the Daily Journal that all the different smalls in the small family had. So
and they were very intricated with the museum when the museum was dedicated, and they've been a part of the museum. So I said, well, we have to make sure that we account for the small memorial park, and then our museum that they gave us the land to be able to have this historical society. So there's many things that we need to include in such a small amount of space. So Diana is the one who's the creative end of it, and I'm the one who just chooses the knowledge.
Right. You're like, okay, so I have this information. Diana takes it and figures out a way to display that information.
Yes.
Yeah, she has a strong art background.
Yeah, she's an amazing artist.
Yes.
I've seen a lot of her work. I follow her on Instagram, and I love seeing the work that she posts. Go ahead, Jim.
One interesting item in relation to this exhibit, the exhibit is being held in the Centennial Room, of course, which is our
the
entrance
first
area.
Yeah, the first room you walk into, the main entrance.
It was the first addition to the original museum in 1953, and it was given by Mr. and Mrs. Leslie Small as an acknowledgement of the county's and city's centennial, which is why it's called the Centennial Room.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that before, and that would have been shortly before he passed away, or not too long before.
Right.
What?
About
4 years? 3 or 4 years.
Yes. And technically, and there's a plaque on the front of the original museum building. Technically, the building and the park are a state memorial to Governor Len Small. The first curator of the museum in 1948 was Mrs. Fanny Still, who had a long history with the Small family because when Len and his young family were going out west in 1904, somewhere in that period, I think, to see one of the Western exhibits, state national fair kind of things. One of the kids got sick on the way, and they were in Washington State, and there was a young nurse named Franny Still who they had contact with, and she stayed with them through the period, made sure the child was all right, and eventually they hired her, said, come back to Kankakee with us. So she did, but she didn't really do any nursing for a while. I think she kind of, kept an eye on the kids. It was a little bit of a nanny kind of thing, but eventually, and for many, many years, she was the secretary for the small farms, which were a big financial operation. She worked probably most closely with Bud Small, who was Len's oldest son, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. And I know we, if someone that's listening to this now wants to learn more about Fanny, they can listen to the episode we did for Women's History Month.
That's correct.
They can, so going back, I think that was in March, right? Yeah, it was March. They can listen to the March episode and learn about Fanny Still, too. But yeah, it's, that's something I think we asked at that time too, when we were talking about Fanny, I was wondering what got the Smalls to donate that whole property to the Historical Society at that time.
Well,
because that's a lot of property and I mean a prime location.
Also, the houses on Callista and the Methodist Church were also part of the property. I think probably school, I don't know, at the other end. But that, and there used to be a house on Charles Street, so a little bit more, because I came across some paperwork concerning their sale to the church. Some paperwork regarding that. But anyways, in 1936, Governor Small passed away, and he left the home to Suzanne. Suzanne was
She was the artist,
right?
Oh,
wait a minute. She passed away in 1931. Excuse me. She passed away in 31. And then the house went to Governor Small. She was older.
Okay.
So she passed away in 1931. She was the last descendant to live in the home. And then in 1936, Governor Small, who inherited, he passed away. So the property was in limbo and kind of decaying from 36 to 48. And then it went to Leslie, who's older. And so in 1947, 48, he decided with his brother-in-law, Arthur English, that they really wanted to do something in memorial for their father as governor. So they decided to donate their family home and the family farm, all of it, to the city of Kankakee, to have the home preserved for historical purposes and to have it dedicated to Governor Small, but also left a little piece of land for the Historical Society to have a museum, and then also a little bit of land for the Civic Center to be built. And that was financed by the Women's Club. They built that.
And that would have been in the 50s.
48, 49.
Oh, late 40s. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, Civic Center was built opened just a year after the museum did.
And I think what makes the Small house fascinating to me is it's simple, but yet it's kind of sophisticated at the same time. It's not a big grandiose house that you would see in, like, let's say the Riverview district, but there's something about the house that is just makes it simple but sophisticated at the same time. At least that's my interpretation of the house.
There's something, in fact, about the appearance of the house. As you know, it looks like it's made of cut stone. It's got smooth, what look like cement blocks.
Yes.
That's stucco.
Yeah, yeah.
The original house, a number of years back, and I can't remember when it was, I think it's 70s or 80s probably, there were some problems with the stucco, and it was all peeled off. And you could see the underlying stone was just piled limestone like so many houses you'd find out along Run 13. And the stucco was eventually replaced on it. But the reason for that, in the first place, was to sort of give the appearance of a fancier cut stone house. And it was not just that one. There were other houses in the area that were done the same way. I think it was kind of an upscaling.
Okay, so that would explain.
To be honest, I prefer the original sort of.
Do you really?
Yes.
I guess I'll have to look at pictures again and see which one I like better. I'll have to study that. I know there's, I guess, when it comes to the small family, it can be kind of controversial of a subject to longtime residents of Kankakee County, just because of things that happened within the family. They've done so many amazing things, but all people a lot of time reference Len Small and the controversies that surrounded his time as governor or even before governor.
As treasurer, state treasurer.
Yeah. And I know some of that stuff is included in the exhibit as well.
I felt it was, I did, and I expressed, I felt it was important to include the good with the bad. Yes, he was governor. Yes, he did many great things, but he also was indicted for embezzlement. So a little bit of a tarnished, reputation. But we wanted to include everything and not talk a lot about this and nothing about that, but to kind of just give a very good image. Also, talking about the death of Stephen Small.
Yes, that would be included as well.
To include that, but not to emphasize it as to make it a focal point, to not be upsetting.
Yes.
But to say this is what happened to this particular member of the family.
Yeah, that's what I try to emphasize as well. It's just it's not to discredit the family. It's just to present, well, this happened, and that's that. That's fact. The governor was tried for embezzlement. That happened. There was rumors,
but he was acquitted.
He was acquitted. The rumors being involved with him and the gangsters at that time. That happened. And the horrible murder of Stephen Small in the 80s, that happened. So it's just to recognize it is good.
We definitely want to represent an even hand of the good with the bad, and represent the family as a whole, and then to make sure that people who were not born in the late 80s, who didn't know about Stephen Small, or people who knew he was governor but didn't know that he was a businessman, or didn't know that he was indicted for embezzlement, and to present these things, but not to be so upsetting to any family member who might be there to look at it.
Yes.
But just to be even about it. When I had said I think we should do an exhibit like this, I really felt it was important to include everything.
Yeah, and someone could really look at some of those tragic events in the Small family's history, and it's really bizarre, especially starting with Len Small's indictment. Because I remember one of the last times we talked about it on the podcast, right after he was acquitted, his wife passes away. And then it wasn't too long after that, Len dies in a car crash. Like, it's just...
That was quite a bit later than that, though.
Was it it a lot later?
Len Howard Small, yes, was what year?
That was 1980.
1980s.
So that would have been like his grandson.
Oh, I thought There we go.
No,
Getting
yeah.
all the
Too many
lens
lens,
confused.
yes.
Too many
Yeah,
lens.
too
No,
many lens, yeah.
I thought the original Len died in a car crash.
Oh, no, he
no,
died
he
at home.
didn't. Oh, okay. Okay, see,
Yeah.
I'm getting confused.
Yeah, Len Howard, who was
With
his
all the lens.
grandson, was the one who was
He
shot
died in a car
crash at on Route 113 South at
Oh.
Warner Bridge Road.
Okay. Okay. A lot of people have unfortunately passed away
Oh, yes.
on that road in that area. It's a dangerous road.
And when Len Howard was killed, there was a time when the general fortunes of the small family were really on the rise. At that point, the newspaper they owned, I believe, 6 newspapers around the country.
Wow.
They had a weekly, what was it, Family Weekly, I think it was called, as a newspaper insert. Was quite a good sized one that were used all over the country. And in fact, Len had just been elected the president of the American Newspaper Publishers Association, and was, at the time he was killed, was on his way. It was being driven up to a meeting in Chicago, I believe, or maybe it was, but of a committee of the Newspaper Publishers Association. His wife, Jean Alice, took over and ran the operation until her death quite a few years later. She was an incredible journalist. My wife, who was librarian at the Journal for many years, worked under her supervision, and she just was an incredible. She was a great news person, even though she had no journalism training.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I've heard the same things about Jean as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some other things we can expect from the exhibit, unveiling that for the first time at the Rhubarb Festival on May 22nd?
That's a good question. I'm wondering.
I mean,
that
obviously, you don't want to
myself.
give it away all away, because we want to encourage everyone to go see it, whether it's at the Rhubarb Festival or not. But obviously, it'll be a little more exciting if you did go to the Rhubarb Festival when it's seen for the very first time.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to imagine that myself. I'm trying to imagine how it's going to.
Because I'm
look
sure you're
when
still putting
it's-
the final touches on it, obviously.
We are
So
trying to make all the decisions on what to, because there's so many things. And what we did was I first pulled archival materials as possibilities, and then we went through boxes of the actual artifacts and pulled out different things to use. Now, what she's actually going to use of the things we pulled, what we have room for, I don't know.
okay.
One of the
Because
things
it's
that was an
kinda
advantage, I think, is, of course, we have this huge collection of material, not just on the small family, but on local history. Our photographic collection alone, I think, will be really an advantage there. A lot of pictures from our own archives will be part of the displays. Original documents, objects, artifacts, things that
Mhm.
some members of the small family through the years owned or was in use. Everything from maybe a campaign button to a fountain pen or a woman's fan or whatever. I'm not sure the exists. Jory knows all
Yeah.
these, but I know what the general kinds of things that we would have added. Because when you develop an exhibit, what you're really doing is telling a story, and you want the viewer to learn about the entire content of the exhibit. You like to move them along from one thing to another so that they absorb it as they go along. You don't probably want to overwhelm them with a huge amount of material
Yeah.
at one time, but you want to refine that down to just the concise, important things that you want the viewer to carry away with them.
Yeah, and that's kind of like even with this podcast episode, there's going to be so many things that we did not talk about, and someone might bring that up when they hear this episode, and it's like, well, we can't bring up
Right.
every single thing.
Yeah.
We're just trying to give you an overview, and obviously, if you want to deep dive even more, you go visit the museum. You can dive all you want in there.
And another thing that we we talked about, Jack and I and Diana, is I wanted to make sure I include actual articles, like newspaper articles. And they said, well, people are not going to stand there and read the whole thing. I said, that's true. But if we see a headlines in the newspaper do not look much like they do today in today's newspapers. So I really wanted some things to be attention getting, and then they could stand there and read the whole article, but we could put at the bottom a very simple explanation of what this article is about, to paraphrase it, but to make sure we include an actual archival material so that they can get a sense of, this is what the newspaper looked like, this is how they did a newspaper, this is how they did an article.
This is the real thing, not
the
a
real
reproduction.
thing, not a copy, not our interpretation of it. But
these are the actual words. Yeah.
And that way they can, if they want to. Now, Jack and I are people that go into a museum and we read every word on every plaque. Some of us still exist. I don't know how many of us in life, but we do. So we would enjoy doing that. But we know that people, want to get a little move on. So I thought, at the bottom, make sure we say this is, a synopsis of what it is. But I was like, we really have to make sure that we capture that and not just put up what we want to write in our own thoughts, but actual material that was
a different, complete range of visitors to any kind of an exhibit like this, too.
I know it's so easy to skip around because there's so much history with the Small family. Obviously, the original Len, the first Len being one of the biggest centerpieces of the family. When was he elected governor?
In the 1920s.
Okay. And
two terms.
I was going to say 2 terms.
Right.
And so what were some of the projects or things that he was known for besides the other things we mentioned, the controversies? What were some of the other things that happened while he was in office that his name gets associated with?
He was known as the Good Roads Governor. He made sure that roads were paved in the state of Illinois because automobiles were coming to light, and automobiles and muddy roads just, didn't really
not with those little
mix
tires, those very thin tires.
So he made sure that there were thousands, I don't know exactly how many thousands of miles that were paved in Illinois, but a lot of roads did get built and they get paved under his direction.
I think in the late 1920s, Illinois had more miles of paved roads than any other state in the country.
Wow.
He also, in a related thing, one of the problems that come with good roads is it's easy for people bent on crime to spread out, rob a farmer in his farmhouse, and zip back to Chicago or whatever.
Yeah.
So
I feel like that's been a problem ever since.
Yes.
Because now it happens with the interstates.
Yes, exactly. But the problem was, of course, that nobody had jurisdiction. You had local sheriffs, you had local police departments, but they couldn't follow this all up. He and there was a lot of pressure, but he was the one who implemented it, said we need a state highway police. There was a lot of opposition one way or the other to that from a political standpoint, but he established a state highway police department, a man named John Stack, who was a Kankakee man who had served as a police officer in Kankakee and chief of police at one time, became the first head of the state police.
Wow, I did not realize that the very first person ahead of the state police was
this
from
in 1921,
Kankakee.
right after
he was elected?
Yeah, so actually, in many respects, Kankakee was the birthplace of the state police department. Interestingly enough, because of various problems with funding, the first state police operation was actually called the State Highway Maintenance Police Department because they could find some money in the highway maintenance budget to pay for it. And this went on for a number of years. Initially, they had, I believe, 50 and later 100 patrolmen around the state, and they all drove motorcycles.
Okay.
Which was pretty cool.
Yeah, at that time.
And eventually, after Governor Small was out of office, the whole thing changed, and eventually became the current State Highway Police Department. But
that's fascinating.
I did not know
that.
Fisheries. The state had a fisheries department, of course.
What's fisheries?
They actually raised fish and released them into the waters for sport and so forth. Okay. There was a fish hatchery in Kankakee. It was out south of the state hospital along the back. I think there's still some gate posts or something back there. Another area, I'm trying to think of it just a moment. It was just in my head and flew right out. Excuse me. Oh, yes. Leslie, his son, was the director of public works for the state after he was elected. And there was a huge number of public works. The Illinois Waterway, the first locks on the Illinois Waterway, Dresden and Joliet and down the way on the Illinois River, were built under the small administration as well.
Okay. So
he had just a wide variety of things that he was involved in.
Mm-hmm. A lot of development.
That's right.
Okay. Wow. That's.
And of course, there was always, the suggestion that he was too much involved with the Chicago political machine and that sort of thing, and the indictment and so forth. But if you balance him out, it's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Was he a saint or a devil?
I think that conversation continues to this day, and I'm sure that'll never get settled. It'll continue to be.
There are people who will definitely say he was not a good person. He did all these questionable acts or bad acts, and then there were people who say he was great. He did great things. So sometimes controversies will just stay that. But the best that I think we can do is to make sure that we try to balance it the best that we can.
Absolutely.
In the exhibit, and not hide one portion just because it might be embarrassing or negative on it, but to make sure that it's all balanced.
Mm-hmm.
And really, as Jory said early on, our purpose in this was to provide an exhibit that told the story of the small family as a whole and their influence upon the community, and this community from its beginning to the present day, not to focus on the one member of the family who achieved widespread state and national recognition one way or the other.
And sorry, go ahead, Jory.
Oh, just to make sure that we do the best we can to do the whole story, not the parts we like the best, and not to eliminate the parts we don't like. But as a historian, I truly believe you need to look at history the way it was, not the way you think it should have been, but the way it actually was, and present it as factual as possible with actual artifacts that present the whole story.
Absolutely. And going back to Leslie and the Daily Journal, really taking that over before it was the Daily Journal.
Right.
So he passes away in, would you say, 1957?
Right.
And at that point, it was the Daily Journal.
57 was the Daily Journal.
Yes. So from then, you said it was his two sons that took it over?
Yes, Len and Burl.
Mm-hmm. And then how does the story continue for the journal from there?
Well, for a time, the two sons ran the operation together. In the early 1960s, they decided to get into the cable television business. So Burrell pretty much specialized in the television and the radio business. Of course, the WKAN and originally an FM station were part of their operation.
When did KAN come into the small hands? Was it when Leslie was still?
Yes, they started it when at that point the newspaper was located in a building at Oak Street and Schuyler, and right next door to that, just south, in the 1950s, I think it was, they started the radio station WKAN. They built a little building. In fact, that building is still there. It has a mural on one side. You can't tell what it looked like anymore. But
yes.
And they also had WKIL, which was an FM operation. And eventually they divested that. But and then, as I say, in the 60s, they decided to go into cable television because that was the era when the only way you could get television signal in Kankakee was having a 50-foot tall tower for your. Somewhere along the line, the two branches of the operation were separated. So Beryl ran the communications or electronic side and Len the newspaper. When I came to Kankakee to work for the Journal, my actual interview was with both the brothers. Because that was before they had split everything up. But in the 60s and 70s and so forth, they really built a large newspaper empire that was, nationwide, and we're and unfortunately since then, of course, with the changes of society and the way people gather news and read advertising today, they've sold off all of the other newspaper operations and retained just the Journal itself. And of course, just recently, for a number of years now, the newspaper actually was printed up in the western suburbs of Chicago because of economic advantage and the fact they probably would have needed to upgrade their printing, presses and so forth.
It's very expensive.
And it was possible to do that electronically and have the papers delivered. But just this past, January or February, they actually had shrunk the operation to the size where that large building at Dearborn and Merchant was just way too large and upkeep and so forth. So they have now moved the newspaper operation to the PNC Bank building, where they have two floors of one floor for the editorial department and one for the business side. And I don't know what's going to happen to that building. I would assume it eventually will be, if they can find a tenant, it will be sold.
Well, I think we summarized it pretty well. Is there anything else you want to add about the small family and tied in with the exhibit?
What we tried to do is as far within the genealogy, we did it as far as much information as we have in our archives. So I wanted to make that point, that we did it as far as we could go, with photographs as far as we could go. So if anybody is missing, because we didn't have information, but if anybody is interested in doing further research on this family, any part of the family, any part of the businesses, contact me. I'm happy to work with you and to show you. We can always show you more artifacts than we have on display, and we're happy to do that. You just need to contact one of us and make an appointment.
Okay.
And then I will be there in the house on Rhubarb Day, except for when I take a little break, but I'll be in the house. And if anybody has any more specific questions, I am happy to answer any questions. And so would Jack. He won't be there that day, but we're happy to answer it.
I'm going to be out of town on Rhubarb Day, but
you're in trouble, Jack. How could you do that? on the Rhubarb Festival Day.
Prior commitment from a long time ago.
Oh, no, I understand. I'm just teasing you. So, yes, really want to point that out. The Rhubarb Festival is May 22nd. It's from 10 to 4. So much happening. Obviously, rhubarb pie is for sale. Strawberry rhubarb pie is for sale. It goes really quickly.
Yes.
We do want to point that out. So, you want to get there.
And jam. Are we still in jam this year?
Oh, jam. Yeah,
jams and jellies, yeah.
Yes.
Jams and jellies.
There's several vendors. There's a car show this year. There's a kids activity area as well. The pie eating contest. So many things going on. There's
entertainment.
There's entertainment this year as well. There's so many new things. So I feel free to check that out. Plenty of food. On top of obviously
food trucks
the
will be
pie,
there.
right? The food trucks. I know Kankakee Podcast is one of the many vendors, but it's really always cool to see all the different handmade items that people have for sale. There's just so many cool things going on.
This is our beginning of the year, so to speak, season.
Yeah.
We have a quiet period from January till now, and then we get revved up. And this is our spring, summer season. In the past, we've had Strawberry Fest a few weeks after that in our area, in the campus. But that's become such a huge thing that
Just
they're gonna move
outgrew the
that
space.
to another location. But so that would be the spring, summer. And then we have many things coming up through the summer. And then, of course, December is our gallery trees.
Yes.
Kind of like the finale of
that is the finale.
of the year.
And in the
This is our
fall, we have
beginning.
our artisan fair as well.
Artisan Fair, yeah.
Oh, and speaking of, I did want to mention that too. The Kankakee Art League has their art on display at Rhubarb Festival
Yes,
as
we had
well.
display in the George Gray Barnard Room.
Yes. So, like I said, there's just so many different things happening at Rhubarb Festival. It doesn't cost to enter.
Nope.
Want to point that out as well. So, you can always go to KankakeeCountyMuseum.com to get more information, or you can find, you go to Instagram or Facebook at Kankakee County Museum as well. Thank you both again.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yes.
We really enjoy doing this.
Yeah, me
Yes,
too.
we always have a good time when we come to do the podcast.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. The feeling's mutual. Well, that concludes this episode of Kankakee Podcast. I'm Jake Lamore. Thank you so much for listening. Please share this podcast with a family member, friend, or neighbor you think might enjoy learning new things about the people and places of Kankakee County. Also, a special thank you to our patrons for helping make this episode possible, including Jake Lee, Jesse Arsenal, Dave Barron, Daryl Damper, Samantha Rocknowski, Lake Iverson, Travis Garcia, Jane Bostwick, Dawn Harrison, Simon Topless, Scott Wright, Harry O'Connell, Jamie Race, Joanne Berry, Anthony Vaselli, Eric Olson, Dan DeBoard, Jeff and Rosa Carroll, Teague Dreenan, Sandy and Steve Twait, and Rose Lucky. Now, to become a podcast patron, go to KankakeePodcast.com and click on the Patron tab. If you pledge $5 or more per month, you'll also hear your name announced on an episode of Kankakee Podcast. Now, there's also other rewards like access to extended versions of episodes, behind-the-scenes podcast episodes, podcast merch, discounts on special events. There's even an option for you and I to spend a day together at the Kankakee County Museum, and so much more. Your monthly pledge is truly appreciated, and our goal right now is to reach $400 per month, which right now we're at about 60% funded. So please sign up for the Patron program today at KankakeePodcast.com. Our theme song is by Lupe Carroll.
This river carries on.